All right. Welcome back, everyone, to the very best podcast from the very end of the bench. We are recording this on 11/5/2020. As always, this is Collin and Emiliano bringing you episode number 27 on the Unhinged Podcast Network. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing okay. I am eager for this NBA season to get started. It looks like the NBA Players Association, the owners, and the league are pretty close to an agreement. It looks like that day that we talked about a few episodes ago of December 22nd will be the start date, which, I mean, I was thinking about it as I was driving around the other day. Like, I cannot imagine an NBA season without the Christmas games. So
Yeah.
whatever they have to do to get the Christmas games in there, it sounds like it might be a 50-game season, but I'm excited nonetheless.
Yeah. And I know that I'm like more of an NBA head than football. Don't get me wrong, I like football, but those Christmas games, especially like the last couple years, like always resonate more with me than the Thanksgiving games.
Oh
And
yeah,
I don't know if it's because the Thanksgiving games have kind of sucked the last couple of years, but like those Cavs Warriors matchups, even the Clippers Lakers ones, or back in the day, like the vintage Kobe ones, like those Christmas games, like it was always like us opening presents and hanging out, laughing, and then like one TV had the Yule log on, other TV had the NBA basketball games going on.
yep,
So it's just it would be not the same if I didn't hear those NBA commentators in the background of my Christmas day.
yeah. And I need those Christmas jerseys. Those Christmas jerseys are nice.
Yeah, so maybe one day we'll get a De'Aaron Fox one. Who knows?
Hey,
But
maybe
I
you
know
have to
we
be relevant
always,
for that.
yeah, maybe one day. I know we always say it, but the NBA season's over, but the rumors never stop. And as you know, Daryl Morey headed over to Philly,
Right?
and already rumors of James Harden to Philly are happening.
Yeah.
And like you guys know, the last couple episodes we began our kind of off-season dives into the divisions, and today we're doing the Southwest Division, so it's only fitting to start off with the Houston Rockets. Already, man, James Harden rumored to go to Philly. I don't think that happens. I think it's just one of those things where people just want something to talk about because ultimately I don't think that Philly moves on from Embiid. I don't think that they move on from Ben Simmons, and I don't think that they move on from either of those people for a 32-year-old James Harden.
Exactly. And here's exactly what I think happened. And we all know that Daryl Morey has a problem with saying things that he shouldn't. He has a long history at this point of saying things that he shouldn't. But I honestly feel like he got in there. He was talking to a reporter and he said, "Man, could you imagine this team with James Harden? That would be a championship team." And that's where the rumor started. Something along those lines of like, I couldn't imagine what this team would be like with James Harden. It would be really nice if James Harden could have come along with me from the Rockets. Like, he said some comment like that, and that's how the rumor got started. I completely agree with you. I don't think these rumors have any true base whatsoever. I don't think that we see James Harden suiting up in a Sixers jersey next year. The Sixers would just have to give up too much.
Yeah, and I don't know if James Harden really makes sense in that offense. I guess maybe if you ran like a pick and roll with him and Ben Simmons, it would work out, but I don't think that him and Embiid would work together for
No.
sure. But I mean, looking at the Rockets, they finished 44 and 28, fourth in the West. Obviously, they had kind of a culture overhaul, new coach, new GM. Um, I don't know. Allegedly, they have the same goal in mind, a championship. So I think more of what I was saying is I don't think the Rockets move on from James Harden,
Oh,
if
okay.
that makes sense. Like I don't think it's them moving on from him. I think that they try to win a championship with James Harden. Like unless like he turns like 34 and it's just not happening and they're not close, I don't think that they start the new kind of rebuild of their team.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the new GM, the new coach, and having the same goal. But I feel like when you're spending the amount of money that they're spending on their players right now, you have to have that goal. Because if the championship isn't your goal, then you're going to sell these pieces off, right? And when I say that, I mean you're going to trade Harden for a boatload of first round picks or for a 26 or 27-year-old and essentially restart the Harden process. You're going to find a younger version of Harden and maybe get a first round draft pick back. Like there's just not much that you can do with this roster outside of just running it back for another championship run. And I mean, like, let's not take away from the idea that the Rockets weren't close. Like we've talked about it before. Outside of a Chris Paul injury in was that 2017, like they were on their way to the finals. And I think that this Rockets team with a healthy Chris Paul would have put up a good fight against LeBron's Cavs. So who knows? I think that we've said it before. I think they missed their window, but who knows? Who knows in the West next year? Anything's possible.
Yeah. And you guys have heard me say sell high on a player before they lose their value, but there's some players where there's no other player like them really in the NBA.
Mhm.
So when you think of like LeBron James, when you think of Luka Doncic, those are the type of players where you kind of don't sell them, like no matter what. But you look at Damian Lillard's, you look at Russell Westbrook's, players like that, like there'll be another point guard that comes in and jacks up threes from 32 feet out. There'll be another, there's already John Morant, which is essentially Russell Westbrook right now, like ferocious rim cutter, doesn't care who's in front of him.
Yeah.
But there's not really another James Harden in the league right now. And that's why I don't think that the Rockets will move on from him because his game will just age well. He's not fast, he's just crafty. He can shoot the ball, lights out. Obviously, he's had his off games, but he's just not really replaceable. So I
Yeah.
think while he still has his talent and his, I guess, youth with him, that they keep trying to claw at that championship until they just can't anymore.
Well, I mean,
But
most
I don't know.
importantly, and sorry to cut you off, but most importantly, before you get off of Harden, I feel like the most underrated piece of his game is his durability. Like I can't remember
Yeah,
a stretch of games that he missed because of injuries. I certainly can
that
never
man got his
remember.
eyeball poked out and
I,
still came out and dropped the 40 piece.
I can't remember a playoff game that he missed. I feel like even with the eye poke, he played the next game. Like that to me, that's like I mean, and this is a little bit of a LeBron love maybe coming out, but like to me, durability has to be a factor in like how fantastic of a player you are.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, if you look at him, like he's not lanky. Like he's kind of bulky. Like I think he's just like a healthy guy, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. Like he just like looks like he's durable. Like like you look at like Frank Gore, and you're like that guy's not gonna get hurt. Like James Harden kind of has that like thicker body where it's just like,
He's
yeah, like
corn
he's good.
fed. I don't want
Yeah,
to assume where he's from, but he's just a corn fed big boy.
yeah, he's definitely built for it. But
Yeah.
outside of James Harden, like let's just say Russell Westbrook isn't the guy to put next to him. Outside of Russ, you have Eric Gordon and PJ Tucker. So who do you plug in for Russell Westbrook to make that like a championship squad? Because
Yeah.
there's not too many places out there that one have the cap space or two want Russell Westbrook at this point. And I know there's always rumors of New York, but like let's say he goes to New York and you get contracts, what you get Julius Randle and whatever, a couple other pieces back in return. Does Harden, Julius Randle, so and so, and Eric Gordon and PJ Tucker win a championship?
No.
No.
And that's, I mean, the ideas of Russ going anywhere, I think are truly, you know, the rumors coming from the Rockets, I think. I don't think that the Knicks are putting out feelers to say, like, hey, we're kind of interested in Russ. Let's let this rumor, slip out and see what kind of feedback we get. I feel like any rumors surrounding Russ being traded are coming from the Rockets. And I mean, it has to be because of how he's played over the last year or so, especially the two last playoff appearances. I mean, I know I'm hard on Russ regularly. He's one of the players in the NBA that I honestly think are a little too overrated, and I know that's a hot take for another time. But I think that his time in terms of like being able to contribute to wins is just over, and the Rockets really just don't know what to do with themselves. I think that it was championship or bust last year, and this offseason, given everything with COVID, has kind of allowed them to have a little bit of a reset. But I honestly think it's bust time. Like, do what you can to get rid of Russ. Stop paying that guy all that money. And yeah, maybe try to put some puzzle pieces around Harden and figure it out. But I'm with you. I don't really know where you go from here.
Yeah. I mean, the only if you're gunning for a championship this year, I think the only way they get it done is if they keep Russ, they keep Harden, they move Eric Gordon and try to get some piece back, like maybe Eric Gordon and like a second or something for Will Barton. Like just get like another 3-and-D person in there, someone that you can rely on, someone that's like a little more reliable than Ben McLemore, than Daniel House, than Austin Rivers, who did have his good games, but just someone that like can get you like 14 a game on the regular. Like just they need some consistency in that lineup because there's going to be games where Russ goes 4 for 16. Like those games are going to be there. So just having that like extra piece to kind of, put your weight on a little bit, pull their weight is super important for that squad. And I think that's basically the only thing they can do. I mean, their other free agents are Tyson Chandler, Damari Carroll, and Jeff Green. Like those aren't game changers. The only game changer, I guess, would be Austin Rivers, and he has a player option, but I think he tests free agency. I don't think he returns. But I don't. Who knows? Maybe a Wesley Matthews and a Will Barton makes a world of difference in that squad.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is just a classic case of, 4 years ago now, the Rockets went all in on James Harden, and they said, we're going all in, and whatever happens, happens. And like I said, they missed that perfect 4 to 5 year window, whether it be injuries, whatever the case may be. They simply missed it, and I agree. They almost have to run it back. Playoff hopes, absolutely a playoff team. As long as you have James Harden on your team, even out in the West, I just don't see you missing the playoffs. Potential hot take might be that they might be battling for an 8 seed, end up doing this offseason, but yeah, not much else we can really say about the Rockets. They're in such a tight spot with that cap space that I just don't know where you go from here.
I think the Rockets' hope is to just kind of take this team, plug in a couple other pieces, move a couple assets, and kind of hope that the other teams either don't gel as well in the West, or maybe there's a couple of injuries to the other teams and they can just slide in there and try to make it to the finals. But I don't know. The Houston Rockets are the Houston Rockets. You never know what to expect. So we'll see what happens. But a team that's kind of on the opposite side of things and has like nothing but options in
Yeah.
the future are the Dallas Mavericks. Their youthful squad finished one game behind the Houston Rockets. One game.
Yeah.
And they don't have James Harden and Russell Westbrook, who are quote unquote all NBA talents, future Hall of Famers, first ballots. So, I mean, one game behind them with Luka Doncic and Kristaps Porzingis is pretty crazy to me. I mean, they're free agents: Tim Hardaway Jr., Courtney Lee, JJ Barea, and Willie Cauley Stein. Still hurts to say his name,
Still.
but still hurts a little bit. Ultimately, I think Tim Hardaway Jr. returns. He has a player option. He's not going to pass up on that 18 mil. He's not going to get it anywhere else.
Yeah.
But they're essentially running with the core of Luka and Kristaps and I guess Seth Curry, who is an important role player. Role players are always important.
Yeah, I mean, he's entered the end of a Ray Allen career. He's entered the Kyle Korver, part of his career where he's there for one purpose, and is to knock down threes.
Yeah. I mean, Luka showed in the playoffs this year, his first ever playoff appearance in the NBA, that he's like ready.
Yeah,
Like he's ready to contend, playing on a sprained ankle, putting up game winners over the Clippers.
yeah.
Like that.
It's not a stretch to say the Mavs could very well be the team that find themselves up against a team like the Nuggets in the Western Conference Finals next year. Like they're an easy sleeper, and I only say sleeper because the West is so strong that like you can't easily count out teams like the Warriors, the Lakers, the Clippers, and the Nuggets. So the Mavs are an easy sleeper, 5th or 6th seed to find themselves in the Western Conference Finals.
Yeah.
And Luka proved that he is that guy. Like he's that, like mama go there goes that man. Like that's Luka now. He's ready to take over the NBA, I think.
Yeah, and I think that is as good as Luka Doncic is, and obviously he is the focal point of the Dallas Mavericks. I think they only go as far as Kristaps can take them.
Absolutely.
Like what they can do next year and their success like hinges on his knees and his ability to stay on the court.
Well,
Because one, obviously, if he's not on the court, they're not winning games. And two, if he misses almost the entirety of the season and comes back for playoff time, where's the chemistry on the court against all of these proven veteran-ready playoff teams?
well, not only that, but I mean, and it's not even just us saying it or thinking it. We saw it happen live against the Clippers. Like I feel like Kristaps was the make or break piece of that, of that battle, of that 7-game series. And we saw exactly how far Luka by himself can take the Mavs. And I know that he's probably going to get better. There are going to be certain parts of his game that he improves upon, but, and I don't want this to necessarily sound ridiculous, but we're seeing pretty much peak Luka in that series, in my opinion. Like we're not going to see him jump that many more levels. And that's just simply because, we've seen what the best players in the world look like at their peak, and Luka's pretty damn close. So we're not going to see him jump leap and bounds ahead. So you're exactly right. It's a league of duos at this point, and you only go as far as your weakest duo. So we'll see what the unicorn has in store for us next year. But I'll be honest in saying that my hopes are not very high for what Kristaps is able to provide for the Mavericks come playoff time.
Yeah. Well, and in regards to Luca, I agree. I don't think that he necessarily gets better. I think that he gets better at making choices.
Yes,
Like
mentally.
his IQ and his basketball choices tighten up a little bit because his skill set is there. Everything is there, and he's not raw in any sense. And it's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
LeBron, what you saw at like 22 to 24 years old. Like all the skills were there. He just needed to know how to utilize them to like their peak ability.
Yeah.
Like he could probably get to the foul line a little more. He could probably make some better choices in regards to the passes that he makes or the plays that he's making. And I mean, it's scary to think about that. That guy's in his super early 20s and already a MVP candidate going forward. But
Well,
I
he
mean, when I
was
look
like
at
he
this,
was he was like fifth or sixth place, in MVP voting in his rookie season. I mean, his
yeah,
rookie season, it was almost an MVP campaign.
who do we draft over him?
I don't want to talk about it. I do want to ask something specifically on Luca, not to run away from the Kings' poor decisions comment, but do you feel like it's a little overshadowed because of how exciting the NBA was that year, because there were so many other storylines going on? Do you feel like it was maybe not talked about enough, just how good Luca was his rookie year? I mean, have we really ever seen a rookie be that impactful and be that good, like since Magic Johnson? And I know LeBron had his run in Cleveland, but it didn't ultimately lead to them really being, you know, successful. And already in year two, Luca's doing the things that he's doing. Do you feel like we've really seen a rookie since Magic as good as Luca?
I don't think so. LeBron was more exciting than
Yeah,
he was good his first couple of years, and that's nothing to take away from. Obviously, he's LeBron James, but Luca just came in ready to be a professional, and he was fine
exactly.
tuned and ready to help his team win. And yeah, they didn't make the playoffs their first year, but this year, he proved that he was ready to take the next step in his second NBA season, his sophomore season. He was
Yeah.
already making those changes to his games and making the right choices. But I mean, what do you think this team really needs to put them over this? Let's say this. They make the playoffs. What assets do you need to beat teams like the Lakers and the Clippers and the Nuggets, the other contenders in the West right now?
Yeah. I mean, in specific players, I would say they need honestly a player like Buddy or Bogdanovich. Like they almost need, a younger version of a Seth Curry. Someone to insert in the starting lineup to provide what Seth Curry is offering off the bench. They need a consistent shooter. They need 48 minutes of really, really good 3-point shooting. And in order for that to happen, you need somebody in the starting lineup who you can trust to have at least 35% from the three. And on top of that, I mean, what do you need? You mentioned it, and I don't want to I don't want to take it away from you, but Andre Drummond, like in the West playoffs, we saw it this year. You absolutely need a big man. If you find yourself in the Western Conference Finals against AD, against Jokic, like that's where you need that second big man to really put your team over the top out here in the West.
Yeah. And I mean, thinking about those names, I think I like the fit of Bogdan a little more than Buddy, just because Bogdan can be a secondary ball handler and shot creator. Buddy is kind of, and it's his Achilles heel, and everyone knows it. His weakest point is that like he can't create off the dribble and he can't do anything with the ball if he has to. So that's why I think of Buddy more in like a Philadelphia or a Brooklyn Nets or a Milwaukee Bucks situation where it's like his role was literally just sitting on the perimeter and jacking up 8 threes a game. I
Yep.
think Bogdan added to that team and they have the connection, they're buddies. I think that kind of puts them over the edge. And then obviously an Andre Drummond, a rebound machine, a defensive machine, someone next to Kristaps to kind of bolster that paint a little more would make a huge difference for sure.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, shooting and a wing defender and a big man, like I don't know, that team's scary to think about it if they get all those things this season or over the next couple of years. Like I think there's a lot to be expected out of the Mavericks because they have Luca, but we have to remember like how young that him and Kristaps still are. Like
Yeah.
we're so ready to put them into the limelight and say, this team's ready to take the next steps. They're ready to make, the NBA finals, but they're in like their second and fourth year in the NBA. They're still young.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and they're going to be a victim of their own success in terms of expectations. Like
Yeah.
you're not supposed to be this successful your second year in, and because they have been, now the timeline for a championship has sped up from maybe 5 years into Luka's career to, oh my, could you guys win a championship next year 3 or year 4? So us as kind of you know analyzing the game just a little bit more like we are here in these deep dives, I think that we can recognize that they are still 2 or 3 years away from really being championship contenders. But it's been a focus on the Mavericks deep dive, as it should be, that it's all up to Luka. If Luka can really take them to those higher heights, and if Kristaps can stay healthy and provide them what they need come playoff time, it's anything is possible with this team. And I feel like this is the one team in this division that you can really say that about. Like they could be a first round knockout because Kristaps isn't able to stay healthy. But they could also sneak into the finals. Like this team is one of those teams that it's not crazy to think that they could, through injuries through other teams, find their way into the finals.
Yeah, and I think that you basically just said it. There's no question with this. They're not in a rebuild situation. They're in a run it back situation. They're going to essentially run it back with that same core,
Mm-hmm.
give or take a couple assets. Like they're still young, like we said a billion times. And Dallas Mavericks are poised for success in the next couple of years. And
Yeah.
I think that kind of takes us into our next team, who is also super young
Yeah.
and technically finished eighth in the West, but didn't get a crack at the playoffs. So the Memphis Grizzlies finished 34 and 39, but didn't beat the Blazers in that little play-in playoff scenario.
Let's get it right. Did not beat Damian Lillard.
Yeah, did not beat Damian Lillard in that. Hey, Melo hit a couple big threes in that. That was kind of his
Fair.
he had his Melo moment that series for sure. But the Memphis Grizzlies, they basically did everything I wished the Sacramento Kings did.
Yeah.
They nailed all their draft picks, even the later ones. They made some good free agency signings. They took a flyer on Justice Winslow, and they just like did everything that I wish we did. Like they're set for the future when you look at it. They got Ja Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr., Brandon Clark, Dylan Brooks, Justice Winslow, and we can even throw in Jonas Valanciunas in there, which
Yeah.
oh, we're going to take it to episode 27 spelling bee test. How do you spell Valanciunas?
Valenchunis.
You were looking.
I was looking at how I spelt it earlier.
Okay. I'm not gonna fact check you on that, but still that core right off the bat. And once again, we're seeing another player drafted behind Marvin Bagley that's had more
Mm,
success than Marvin Bagley and Jaren Jackson Jr.
yeah, and we're going to get to the Kings eventually, and I know for those of you that are local with us here in Sacramento, we're going to get to the Kings eventually. But one thing that I want to skip ahead on is this comparison, and it's just if you flip the injuries, the script is completely different. And I feel like that's the one thing that the Grizzlies almost can use as an excuse is like so much of their season was surrounded by just annoying nagging injuries, and especially heading into the bubble right before the stoppage happened, the Grizzlies were poised to make a run for not only to solidify the 8th seed but honestly take away the injuries, and they find themselves in like an OKC situation where they're surprising everyone in the 6th or the 7th seed. And I don't know if that makes me sound crazy, but I feel like looking back on some of the injuries they had, like there's no question that they are a better team than their record showed.
Yeah, late season they had a couple nagging injuries with Brandon Clark and I think it was Jaren Jackson Jr.
It
They
was,
both
yeah.
both missed a couple games, but I don't know. I just that's one of those teams that I look at and it just makes me sigh a little bit because it's kind of like the Dallas Mavericks where in 5 years like this team's going to be really freaking good, like really good. John Morant is a dog, reigning rookie of the year going into his second year. Like that he's going to be one of those future faces of the NBA. Like you
Yeah.
could just see it in his game. Like almost, I know I compared him earlier, but almost like a Russell Westbrook, where He's just dunking on people, making ESPN, doing everything that he can to try to help his team win.
Yeah. I mean, he's not that different from De'Aaron Fox in terms of, you know, their ball handling, their speed while ball handling is, is far above average. And, I mean, that dunking ability, like that strong dunking ability. I mean, De'Aaron Fox dunks the ball so hard that he hurt his shoulder last year. And John Morant dunks the ball with no regard for his own life. Like, I mean, we had, older pros coaching John Morant on how he needs to
On how to land.
so that he doesn't break his body. Like
Yeah.
that's, like that lack of fear is something that I wish more young players had, honestly.
Yeah. We'll talk about it again, the youth. And
Yeah,
I think the youth kind of carries us into what they're maybe missing. And what they're missing is experience.
absolutely.
Like this team with 2 more years of experience and core chemistry together is probably finishing the top of the conference, right? Because
Absolutely.
you're gonna have people like Kawhi, PG, I hate to say it, but LeBron James, like starting to enter like those 34 to 38-year-old years where they're not as efficient anymore. And you have John Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr., Brandon Clark, all those people starting to enter their mid 20s at their peak on the same team.
Yeah.
Like Jaren Jackson Jr., he has a kind of a funky looking 3-point shot, but it goes in like 35% of the time. John Morant is only going to get better at shooting the ball. Like this team only gets better. And the only thing that I guess you could say they're missing is maybe a couple veterans to kind of lead the way, like a locker room presence, a Kent Bazemore, throw him in there, an energy guy that, puts his arm around the players and pulls them aside if they get too energetic or start yapping at the officials. Like that's really all this team's missing.
Yeah, I mean, they're in such a peculiar position because they almost don't want someone who's going to come in and be productive, statistically. Like you don't want to take the ball out of John Morant's hands. You don't want to take the ball out of Jaren Jackson Jr.'s hands and hand it to some, 28-year-old, fringe superstar to carry your team into like a Western Conference final situation. You're exactly right. Like you need that veteran presence to coach these players up so that in 2 or 3 years they're ready to make a run for a championship. So
Yeah.
if they're in that weird position where you almost, even if Russell Westbrook was a free agent, and wanted to come to the team, it's like we're actually good. We'd rather take, like you said, a veteran who's not going to contribute.
Yeah. The worst thing they could do is try to bring in a veteran guy and sign him to a 3-year deal, kind of like the Kings did back in the day with George Hill.
Yeah.
And it's just not a good contract. And I get the idea there, but just keep this team together, keep the youth movement going, keep the cap space going, and you're in a great place going forward. And for all of our listeners out there, the answer to the spelling bee for Jonas Valanciunas was Valanciunas. So Emiliano is officially 0-2 in the reserve spelling bee for our NBA players.
I want to make it known that there's no preparation for this whatsoever. These are
That's
on
the
the
best part,
spot,
man.
and I don't appreciate it.
You don't get to study for these tests. It's a school of hard knocks out here. But yeah, and once again, all these teams kind of flow into each other a little bit. So the Memphis Grizzlies, one of the youngest teams out there right now, are flowing into the San Antonio Spurs.
The Spurs, man, like there's not too much we can say about the Spurs in terms of like what they're going to do this offseason because they're really just in like post victory mode. I mean, like 22 years making the playoffs in a row, 22 years in a row. That is in the NBA, with like the salary cap situation, what it is, like that is truly unheard of. Even more so than just 22 years in a row. Out of the last 30 years, they made the playoffs 28 out of 30 years. That is absolutely ridiculous. In that time, they won 5 championships, as everyone knows. They had 7 years in that 22-year run. They had 7 years with 60 wins. I mean, the Spurs are really just, there's nothing that they could do at this point to disappoint anyone. Outside of like a huge dramatic exit by Greg Popovich, you're really just spending the next couple of years kind of riding off into the sunset. And even with that being said, you still kind of find yourself in the fight for the playoffs. Like no one had it in their predictions that the Spurs were going to find themselves in a playoff race, and yet very similar to the Patriots, they just kind of find themselves in that position every single year. So key free agents for them, DeMar DeRozan, although he does have a player option, and you would expect that he would pick it up, but along with DeRozan in that Raptors trade was Jakob Poeltl, and then looking forward, another year, LaMarcus Aldridge is a free agent in 2021. And the reason I wanted to call out him as a free agent in 2021 is because I absolutely believe that the Spurs know exactly what position they're in. I have to believe that Greg Popovich knows that he's not competing for a championship. And so I think that you start to position yourself to have a few additional draft picks, because although you're not competing for a championship, Greg Popovich's teams are not going to be in line for a number one overall pick. They're not going to be at the bottom of the NBA. So why not trade an Aldridge to, I know this team keeps coming up, but they're going to be looking for a big man next to AD. Trade Aldridge to a team like the Lakers. Trade Aldridge to a team like the Clippers, who lose Montrezl Harrell in free agency. Like, find somewhere where you can trade Aldridge for a few future first round picks and maybe a few key pieces to keep yourself in that hunt for the playoffs. But I say get rid of Aldridge. I don't have much else on here besides the core and maybe a few key additions, but that's my number one talking point. Is I think Aldridge is the piece that gets moved this offseason, maybe even before DeMar DeRozan.
I think I feel the exact opposite. I think DeMar DeRozan doesn't pass up on the money that he's gonna pick up with that player option. Like, there's no way he passes that up. It's his last payday. But I think more teams are willing to take a flyer on DeMar DeRozan than they are on LaMarcus Aldridge. Like, we're kind of phasing, and I know the big man is like always useful, but there's just something about LaMarcus Aldridge that's like so like late 2000s. Like, his game just screams like 2009 to me.
Yeah.
Like, that guy that takes a butt ton of mid, and I know DeRozan does too, but just a guy that takes a butt ton of mid-range shots, posts up down low, and just kind of slows down the offense. And that's just not what this day and age of basketball like is really at right now. Like, I could see DeRozan like getting traded to like one of these contending teams, and I don't have one off the top of my head, but I just think DeRozan's a little more movable, especially being on an expiring contract the next year. I think they'd be able to get a couple draft picks and obviously a salary filler in return for DeRozan. But Aldridge, I'm not sure. I don't know what they would really get for him.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, the reason Aldridge and, the reason I gravitate right towards teams like the Lakers or the Clippers is because Aldridge is not someone, who contributes to you getting 60 wins in the regular season. Aldridge is the guy who contributes to you getting the offensive rebound that you absolutely need with 4 minutes left in Game 7 of the Western Conference Finals. He's that guy that, plays defense down on the block when you absolutely need it most in crunch time. And I almost think that DeMar DeRozan is like, I still think that he has like this cloud over his head of like right when he left, obviously Kawhi went to the Raptors, but like right when he left the Raptors, they were able to win a championship with the guy that they replaced him with. So in my opinion, I just don't see DeRozan being like a game changer, someone who carries me into the championship, being that difference maker. But I think Aldridge is like the big man that you kind of fit in as like the 9th or 10th guy, that helps you kind of win a Game 7 or helps you get into a Game 7. And I don't know, maybe I'm just looking at it the wrong way, but that's at least the way I see it.
Yeah, I guess if you think about it, Aldridge's contract will be expiring the next year as well. So, I mean, he could maybe Aldridge over to the Celtics. Like, maybe that's something that works out. Like, they've never really had a solidified big man over there, and he's someone that can stretch the floor for you and get you some rebounds, and that's kind of something they desperately needed. So, yeah, I guess if you think about it, there's 29 other teams out there, so there'll be a suitor for pretty much any player that you have. But at the end of the day, the Spurs are kind of at that like boring moment in their franchise where fringe playoff, like late draft picks, like you don't really know like what they're going to be and where they're going to be going forward. But I just don't think there's really much to say on the San Antonio Spurs going into next year, besides the fact that they definitely need to rebuild.
Yeah.
Pop probably needs to retire because he looking like he came out of the grave every game. and they need to get the Aldridge and the DeRozan contract out of there and try to get some draft picks.
Yeah, and I mean, I have it on here, and this is probably the last piece that we'll talk about the Spurs on. You're kind of at that point where you're searching for the Tim Duncan replacement, right? And I know that right away, obviously, you're searching for the next Hall of Famer that you're going to add to your team. But when I say that, I mean the Spurs need that guy who's going to be a Spur forever. And they thought it was Kawhi, and it immediately turned out that it wasn't. He wins one championship, injuries, whatever. We could have an entire episode on what happened with Kawhi, but you need to find that guy that's not only going to contribute at a Hall of Fame level, but is also just going to be willing to play the Spurs way. And that's what I mean by you need to find a Tim Duncan replacement.
Yeah,
So,
the Spurs kind of found themselves in a Cavaliers situation where they kind of thought that Kyrie would always be there taking the reins from LeBron,
yeah.
and then all of a sudden they request a trade, and you're like, oh shit, like what do I get in return for this guy? Like he's demanding a trade. Like they thought it was going to be Tim Duncan phasing out and Kawhi Leonard, a defensive, offensive superstar, taking the reins for their team, and then all of a sudden you're trying to find a salary and a contract and a guy that kind of equates to it, but just isn't the same. And obviously, the Cavs elected to trade for Isaiah Thomas, and the Spurs elected to trade for DeMar DeRozan,
Yeah.
which they were getting talented pieces back. But when a player demands a trade, like you're just not going to get the same type of pieces back, and it throws a huge roadblock in your future development as a team. So it's
Yeah.
not the Spurs' fault that they're in the situation that they're in. It was obviously Kawhi Leonard, but I think that Pop did his absolute best in trying to keep that team a contender over the years after Kawhi left.
Yeah, no, definitely. There's nothing negative that we could possibly say about the Spurs because of the sustained success that they've had, and yeah, I mean, I wish all the best to Pop, but I definitely agree that it's time that he retires, and it's sad to see him, riding off into the sunset from a team that probably won't make the playoffs over the next few years, and definitely is not in line to win a championship as his retiring season. So not much else we could say about them, but a team that we could probably dedicate an entire episode to, but won't, is the New Orleans Pelicans. And they were in the bubble. Conspiracy Emiliano believes that they were in the bubble because Adam Silver wanted Zion Williamson on TV. That's why I believe the Pelicans were truly in the bubble. That's why I believe they extended it to 22 teams when they probably shouldn't have. But Pelicans finished 30-42, including the bubble games. Key free agents for them is, of course, Brandon Ingram. You said it right away, right when I mentioned it. They're definitely going to bring him back. He's probably a cornerstone of their potential future. But, two players who I want to mention in the 2021 free agency is Lonzo Ball coming off of his rookie contract. And then the number one trade piece that we've mentioned enough times in these last few episodes, Drew Holiday. So right away, Lonzo Ball, do you think that there's a decision to be made before free agency time? Like, do you think that it's possible that Lonzo finds himself in trade discussions by the trade deadline next year?
I mean, he's already in trade discussions. Like, there's rumors of him going to a couple different teams, and I don't think that he remains at Pelicans going forward. And I don't think that it's really anything that he did wrong. I don't think that that team's going to value what he's able to produce on the court and put a dollar sign next to that they're willing to take him back on. Like they're gonna have to extend Brandon Ingram, they're gonna extend Zion Williamson, and there's not gonna be enough room or money for Lonzo Ball. Like I don't know. It's just the Pelicans are one of those teams where they kind of rival the Grizzlies in a sense of like they could go in so many different directions, and they have so much youth and so much talent, and they have a contract in Drew Holiday where they could get some major draft capital back and some major plug and play pieces back to put them like in the perfect situation to win. But ultimately, I don't see Lonzo Ball in that future of Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram on the Pelicans.
Interesting. I honestly didn't think that you were going to go that way, but I agree. I'm super low on Lonzo Ball. I just don't understand the hype. But their core as of right now, if the season started tomorrow, their core absolutely has to be Lonzo, Josh Hart, Brandon Ingram, and Zion Williamson. Like that's their core four. And I'm going to say it again. I feel like I've said it on this podcast before. I think Zion is overrated, but I think he's impossible not to be. Like the amount of success that people are expecting from him, I feel like it's impossible not to be overrated. So I really don't know where the Pelicans go from here. I think that they're in kind of a tough spot too, of like, you can't really add anybody who's going to take away from the development of your Zions and of your Brandon Ingrams. So you almost don't want to bring in a superstar, to help you make the playoffs or to help you make a championship run. You really want to prime yourself for 3 to 4 years from now being involved in the championship race. And that means not bringing in a superstar right now.
Yeah. I think the Pelicans are good enough to not add any major contracts next year and still make the playoffs as an 8 seed.
Yeah.
Like, I think they're just a notch better than the Memphis Grizzlies. And that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. And I think we see a healthy season for Zion Williamson. And I think we see him kind of become the player that he is hyped up to be. Like, you can't teach that body size and that quickness and that agility, but you can teach like the other tangibles of a game. And I think that he has like the dedication to become the player that everyone thinks he can. And I mean, thinking of him next to Brandon Ingram, like Brandon Ingram is like the opposite of Zion. Like he's 6'7", weighs like a buck 20, it looks like. And I don't know, 6'7", plays like KD with a 7'3" wingspan. Like that's a scary duo, him and Zion. Like
Yeah, it's just frustrating that, I mean, he didn't even play, 2/3 of the season. And, he's like making the cover of 2K. He's, in an abundance of commercials. And I just don't understand it. Like, I just don't understand. I want to see true production throughout an entire season before we put him on this pedestal of, like the next just transcendent superstar.
yeah,
And
well, we couldn't
that's
judge
what
him
I want
off.
to
We
see.
couldn't judge him off of last season. Like he was hurt for a while. Like that's
No,
not
and
that's
but
not
that's my
anyone's
point.
fault.
That's exactly my point. Is like, I don't want to judge him off of last season. So why is he still receiving so much hype? Like, let's take a step back. Let's see a complete season without injuries, and at that point, let's reassess where we think Zion is going to land 15 years
Yeah,
from now.
I think the thought process there is that he didn't. The people weren't like the hype wasn't wrong, So like, why take the hype away? It's not his fault that he wasn't on the court. And when he was on the court in those small doses, like he showed flashes. Like well, his first game in, he hit like 4 out of 5 threes, and it was like 4 in a row or something. And that was
Yeah,
like a super small dose when he was playing those like 2-minute spurts. So we see Zion with like a actual off season, an actual training camp,
actually
and a
being in
full.
shape.
Yeah, I don't know if that'll ever happen. He's a big boy. That is Frank Gore right there. If we think about Frank Gore, maybe a
Yeah,
lineman. I don't know. So I mean, but there's other things to throw in there. He did tear his meniscus, and
yeah,
that's speaking from someone who has torn a meniscus in myself. That is something that could kind of linger a little bit,
yeah,
and it's not
absolutely.
necessarily that I'm scared of it re-tearing. I just know that it feels uncomfortable sometimes,
Yeah,
and I'm not 6'7", 900 pounds. So
and playing 7 days a week.
with a 40-inch vertical.
Yeah, yeah,
So, I mean, I hope the best for Zion Williamson, and he is like a generational talent if he can stay healthy. But this Pelicans team is definitely heading in a really, really good direction. And I think that they could string together more success than they could in the AD era. And it's not anything against AD. I just think that they have competent people in there running it right now, and they have the tools to kind of surround Zion with good talent,
yeah.
which is the exact opposite of what they're able to do with Anthony Davis.
Well, they have to be willing. That I think that's the one thing. They have to be willing to pay the right guys at the right times, and be willing to invest in the idea that Zion Williamson plus a couple of potentially big contracts in the next 5 to 10 years can win a championship.
Yeah, I mean, if they get a couple good shooters in there, like maybe a Joe Harris, or which
Mm.
is essentially a younger JJ Redick, and a real big man in there, like I said, like this team is gonna make the 8 seed next year.
Yeah.
Like I don't have any doubts in my mind.
Interesting. All right. Well, I mean, we said it right at the top. These divisions out in the West are deep. We're into it now, and it's only going to get more exciting. We're just 2 episodes away from the Pacific Division. I know everybody's waiting for the Lakers, the Warriors, Clippers, and we might even have a special edition Kings deep dive episode coming soon. So thank you guys for listening. As always, guys, thank you for listening. Collin, what do you have for them before we get out of here?
Yeah, we say it every episode. Just make sure you follow our socials. Reserves Podcast on Twitter. Rate, review, like our podcast on Apple Podcasts. And we're going to be here for the remaining divisions. And before you know it, in a blink of an eye, the NBA season is here. Christmas.
Yeah. Don't fret. Kings bad trades, Kings bad free agency signings. The bad draft of the Kings is on its way. Okay.
And that's why it's a whole episode for the Kings deep dive, and not just a 5-minute segment.
That's right. We might even have some special guests. I know we keep talking about our friends coming on, and we've got some exciting stuff planned. So definitely don't go anywhere.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for tuning in. I'm sure you guys are all tired of the election talk, because I know it's exhausting me. So if you need a break, keep the election on your TV, but listen to our podcast on the side. So thanks you guys for listening.
All right, see you later.